Thanks, Kayla. Good morning, everybody. I'm Johnny Gowdy, a director at Regen. So we're a not-for-profit organization. We're a bit like a consultancy firm. I guess you could describe us as a think tank based in Exeter. And before I get into the subject of onshore wind, I want to talk a little bit about employment and the economic opportunities for our young people in the southwest of England. So we employ 30 people at the moment, mostly graduates and postgraduates. A considerable number coming from Exeter, Plymouth, and Bristol universities. And it's one of the things that struck me recently is the real desire for young people to work in the low carbon sectors, the renewable energy sectors, or new technologies associated with decarbonisation. So just to give you an example, we put out a job advert to take on 2 interns. We usually do 4 interns a year, and we had 97 applicants for those. Most of them, as I said, coming from the southwest. And just looking at their CVs, just an incredible range of bright young people and older people as well, I should say. We had quite a few people coming back into the industry from as a second career option. Almost impossible to differentiate between them. All got really good degrees, mostly got masters, all done great work experience, etc. And the kind of common theme talking to those people was their desire to make a difference, to do something different in terms of dealing with climate change, but also to work in an industry that they perceive to be sustainable and having a bright future. So I think that's the context that we need to think about the energy transition and the economic opportunities that we have, that particularly here in the southwest of England, we are suffering from a brain drain. We're seeing our young people going off somewhere else. And so if we can create the industries down here that can attract them and give them a sustainable career, then that is far more valuable to us. Today's topic, I'm going to talk about the economic aspects of onshore wind. Now, I just want to make it clear, my view is that we need to have a mix here. And if we are going to achieve net zero, we need to maximize the utilization of all resources. So onshore wind is one technology, but it's one of a number of different technologies that we could utilize in the southwest. And I'm particularly interested in offshore wind, interested in our solar arrays, and linking in those generation technologies with the storage, energy storage technologies that we're going to need in order to be able to provide a resilient energy system. So although I'm going to focus on onshore wind, because that's what we've been asked to do today, it is one of a number of different technologies. I'm going to touch briefly on the jobs, which is kind of the first thing we think about when we think about economic benefits. There's also some local benefits in terms of land rents and business rates, which I'm not going to touch on in the 8 minutes, but I'll cover off in some of the breakout sessions. The economic aspects of low cost energy, and onshore wind being the cheap, you've probably heard this already, is the cheapest form of renewable energy and is indeed cheaper than other forms of energy generation. The aspect of attracting businesses, and particularly those businesses that want to be net zero and are looking for opportunities to move to parts of the world or to regions that can offer them low cost energy. And then the final thing is opportunities for community benefits and local ownership. Now, I'm not going to touch on that because you've got a session on that this afternoon with Jake Bernier, and I spoke to Jake, and I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but that's a really important aspect, as well as how much of that economic activity can we maintain and retain locally. So first of all, just a sort of context, a broader context, taking some data from the Office of National Statistics on the number of people working across the UK in the low carbon sectors. And they've come up with a number of about 200,000. Now, the ONS numbers are notoriously undervalued, if you like, or underestimated for an industry like low carbon, because it's very difficult to define what a low carbon industry is. So you could take this as a very low estimate. I mean, there's lots of industries that are supporting low carbon technologies that you wouldn't define as a low carbon industry. But around about 200,000, adding about 40 billion turnover to the UK economy per year. And those numbers haven't changed very much over the last few years. And in fact, there's been a slight decline in the number of people working in the low carbon industries, which might seem really strange given the climate emergency, but actually it's reflecting the fact that we've seen a decline and a drop in the number of projects that are being developed and constructed. So in terms of onshore wind, I mean, there's a couple of key messages there. One message is we've got 12 gigawatts of onshore wind installed across the UK. As you can see from the slide, a lot of that is in Scotland, a considerable amount in Wales, And in England, just over 3 gigawatts of onshore wind currently installed. Devon's contribution to that is 134 megawatts, so about 1% of the UK total. But I just want to draw your attention to the pipeline. So these are the projects that are now coming forward. And what you can see is that Scotland still has a relatively strong pipeline of projects. Wales and Northern Ireland has a fair amount, almost nothing in England, almost no onshore wind projects in that pipeline. And that's important because that pipeline represents between 3 and 5 years of work. If you want to start an onshore wind project and get it built, it takes between 3 and 5 years to go through the various planning permissions, etc., get approval, get construction going, etc. So even if we in England took a decision to sort of improve the conditions for onshore wind and to go for onshore wind, it would probably take us 3 to 5 years before we'd see that pipeline beginning to increase. So that drop in development in onshore wind in England has had a significant impact in terms of the jobs and economic opportunities in England and in the southwest. And to me is a kind of a warning flag that we're not going to meet our net zero targets. I mean, the Committee on Climate Change, you probably heard this number before already, has said we need between 30 and 35 gigawatts of onshore wind in a mix with other technologies as well in order to meet that net zero target. In terms of jobs, so between 4,000 and 5,000 people currently working or tagged as working in onshore wind. And I must caveat that. I mean, it's really difficult to say you're an onshore wind employee because most companies are dealing across multiple technologies. And so it's an indicative figure only, I would say. So some work's been done to estimate what it could be. If we did actually go for that 35 gigawatt figure by 2035, we could see up to 14,000 people working in onshore wind. So that's not a huge number compared to the 200,000 total, but it gives you an idea of the scale. One thing I'd quite like to emphasize is the fact that the onshore wind jobs tend to be higher value. So if you want to create lots of jobs, energy efficiency, absolutely, putting in loft insulation requires a lot of labor, but it's a relatively low value sector, if you like. And I'm not disparaging energy efficiency because we need lots of energy efficiency, but the onshore wind jobs will tend to be higher value jobs, engineering type jobs, technical jobs, for example, because of the technology that's involved. And one of the reasons that it has got that higher value is that, you know, onshore wind is actually a very efficient technology. So you put up a wind turbine, it will run for 20 years, more or less. It does require operations and maintenance, but it's a relatively light touch. So it's a very efficient technology once it's been built. So consequently, it's not generating lots of jobs, but it is generating high value jobs. A couple of other things to mention in terms of the economic opportunity. One, emphasize again, it's a very low cost energy. And in terms of bringing down the average cost of our electricity within a portfolio of other technologies, it's really important that we have a substantial chunk of onshore wind because that will bring down the overall levelized costs of energy, the total cost of energy, and it will have a downward pressure on the electricity market costs. In fact, onshore wind is now cheaper than even building new gas-fired power stations and a lot cheaper than nuclear. A key reason that we would want to have more onshore wind, indeed more renewables generally in the southwest, is to attract businesses and companies to come to our region. You might have seen in the press with the COP26, the race to zero, which is companies pledging that they will achieve their own net zero by 2030 or 2035, etc. So the big ones, Microsoft, Google, but also small companies. Regen has also signed up to that pledge, so lots of SMEs. So those companies are now putting access to low cost energy quite high up in their priority list of places where they want to go. So they're looking for a skilled workforce. I think we've got that. They're looking for a good place to work and a good place to be. I think we've got that. But they're also looking for low cost energy, low cost net zero energy. Scotland at the moment is branding itself as the place to go if you want to build a new high-tech industry and you want to have access to low cost energy. And if we're not very careful, the Southwest and Devon in particular will get left behind, and we might find ourselves, you know, retaining the industries that have sustained us so far, tourism, care sector, you know, second homes and retirement, but we're not going to attract the new industries that are going to keep our young people here. So just going back to my initial point about that desire for young people to work in sustainable energy sectors and the desire for young people to stay in the Southwest, I think that's probably the key economic reason why we want to consider, first of all, increasing the overall generation of renewable energy in the southwest, and secondly, considering that onshore wind should be a key part of that. So I think I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.